Our next speaker is the only real doctor up here. And Gregg Dimmick is also, I think, the most persistent man I know. He will simply not settle for half answers to a problem. And the problem that he ran into, I guess more than a decade ago in Wharton County was, what's this business about some kind of Spanish army camp here, or Civil War camp, or other kinds of baloney that people were feeding them to explain what might have turned up from time to time. And Gregg is a master of what the 19th century philosophers called the consilience of induction, or what we might try to call the convergence of evidence, of getting all kinds of evidence in different languages of different kinds, forensic evidence, memoirs, maps, archeological digs, you name it, and putting together the most complete story, and also figuring out who's lying, because that's what historians have to do. You know, we make a profession out of reading dead people's mail, and anyone who's ever been to college and wrote back to his mom knows that people lie sometimes, even when they're writing personal letters. So Gregg has been getting deeper and deeper and deeper into what I unfortunately tried to answer 8 years ago at the very first San Jacinto Symposium, and that was where did the country of Mexico really lose Texas? When did it happen? What was the tipping point? And I suggested back then, even though Gregg was telling me I was wrong, that it was at Mrs. Powell's Tavern. And Mrs. Powell's Tavern is still a very interesting place. It's where the Mexican High Command got together out by Turkey Creek, close to the county line, is that right, Gregg? Between which two counties?
Fort Bend and Wharton.
Fort Bend and Wharton counties. It's a great archaeological site and a very interesting site, but what Gregg told me then and has convinced me of since then is that it was in the aftermath of the meeting of the Mexican officers, the Mexicans who were left over after the Battle of San Jacinto. It's what they stepped into after they left this high command and went back to try to get into a more defensible mode and reestablish contact with the Mexican government. What they stepped into was El Mar de Lodo, the Sea of Mud. And they stepped into it just as one of those 3-day rains came along. It never rains for 3 days in Texas, does it? Houstonians know better than that. And so Gregg has been, since I've known him, digging and coming up with interesting and more interesting and even more interesting things in various places. At the Coleto Goliad battleground, on the trail of the Mexican army as described by De La Peña, and described better by De La Peña than the other sources, right? Even though he's a forgery, some say. And now Gregg has been involved in this archaeological work at the NRG site. And rather than talk anymore myself, I'd like to have Dr. Dimmick, who someday needs an honorary PhD. For any representatives of any universities out there need someone to give an honorary degree to, Arizona State, whoever. I think Gregg Dimmick is a candidate to be a doctor. Gregg, please.
Thank you, Jim, very much. Michael asked me to show you all my T-shirt. This is the pay I've received for hundreds of hours digging San Jacinto. It's got this. On the back is the Guerrero plate that we found in Square 2 on the battleground. Manuel is the one that dug that Guerrero plate, but that's the pay we get for all this hard work. Now he's going to have to get us another one. This says 2003, which is proof that we started this project in 2003. I've been assigned the non-uniform artifacts, and I want to tell you very briefly that I was in Goliad at their Christmas book sale. I was hawking my book, and I got a phone call from Gary Wiggins, and I knew they were out digging that day, and of course I was just sick that I couldn't be there, but I get a call from Gary Wiggins, and he said, "Doc, we're finding stuff. We're finding stuff." I said, what have you found? Bayonets, musket balls, we're finding, and it's like, oh my God, you know, 1.5 miles south of the battlefield. I'm going to show you some of the artifacts we found. I'm going to try not to give it away to anybody. I know the kind of the cat's out of the bag now, but I'm still going to try to give you some hints about some of the thought process that was going on. We can skip that. I want to show you a little bit more. I know they have about the conditions, but I want to talk to there are volunteers here that are not too happy with me because I didn't call them to work at this site. But I wanted to show you why we didn't necessarily call you, because it was so limited in space. We're working in these little lanes that the wood gator has gone through, and it was very limited number of metal detectors. Roger and Douglas kept telling me no more than 2 or 3 metal detectors at a time. We can't handle it because each metal detectorist has to have a team. The bottom right picture is a very good-looking crowd you might see in the maroon shirt, which I think is appropriate as an Aggie. The maroon shirt, John Culberson came out there and actually helped us, and he's been learning metal detecting along with the rest of us. And I got to tell you this story. This is part of the process. After they found this site on a Saturday, I have Tuesdays off. I'm old and I can do that, and so they said, you got to come out here this next Tuesday. And I said, I'm there. And I was the only one that was signed up to go. Well, they decided that my granddaughter was going to be induced. My daughter-in-law was going to be induced, and my granddaughter was going to be born the same day. But as a pediatrician, I knew that the timing was going to be such I'd have plenty of time to go out there and dig and still make it to the battleground, right? Or back to the delivery. I said, she's not going to deliver till, 3 or 4. Well, I'm on the way. I don't have Roger's number. I'm the only metal detector to be that's supposed to be there that day, so I can't get a hold of him. They called me and said, she's having an emergency C-section right now. Get here. And I told them, well, I've already been to several emergency C-sections. And I've never dug at the NRG retreat site. And I knew I couldn't make it to the emergency C-section on time anyway. So this picture is that day, and I'm holding a bayonet, and it's in my granddaughter's baby book. I got them a copy. Instead of being at the bedside at the delivery, this is my picture for her baby book. And it's appropriate. My wife's nickname is a grandmother, because grandmothers can't be called grandma. She's Dee Dee, and they decided that I was Digger, so I think it's very appropriate. My daughter-in-law has never actively said that she's still mad at me, but I think that's the case. I've learned a little bit about bayonets since we started finding bayonets. These are part of the, I think it's 8 bayonets we found at the site. I was going to tell you the parts of the bayonet. That's the blade on the left. The socket is the upper right, and then there's the stem. I'm blocking on the word. There's another shank. Thank you. And it's rusted, but in the middle of the socket there where it connects is the mortise, and that's where it connects. And I found out it's very complicated. I got a book on the British bayonet. I ordered it on eBay, and it's from 1718 to 1783 or something. It's unbelievable how complicated it is. And so it's really tough to figure out exactly what type bayonets these are, but I think we have a pretty good idea. Bayonet size, you can look at these numbers on the left, 20, 15, are the location numbers of the bayonets. So these are bayonets we found. You can see that our length goes all the way from 54.7 down to 18.5. Our socket diameter is generally 2.6. There was no socket on the last bayonet. This is after conservation, this bottom picture is. This is a Brown Bess India pattern musket, and that's a good place to start because we knew that primarily the Mexican Army had India pattern Brown Bess muskets. So they were made from 1796 to 1819. Their length, if you look there, 55.3 centimeters, and the socket diameter 2.35, so it doesn't seem to match. Going back, it's like, well, we had one that was almost 55 in length, and none of them were 2.35. They're all bigger than that. And I would argue that we have some evidence here that obviously some of this could have just been corrosion with the links, but most of these links were so short. I think we have evidence that possibly these bayonets would break off and they'd resharpen them. And that's my theory on what's happening with the bayonets. And the sockets even more so. I think for some reason they seem to corrode more. There might have been more wear on them, but I'm suspecting that they corroded more, which of course would make the socket diameter bigger if they're corroded. So we're seeing bigger socket diameters than we should, but I'm still convinced that they're primarily that type. One of the shanks was distinctly different, so we do have a different type of bayonet. I wanted to, we found out as metal detectorists, it's hard for me to say that detectorists, I've always called myself a metal detector, but technically that's the machine. So as metal detectorists, we actually found enough bayonets out there and ramrods on the park. I don't believe we found a ramrod at NRG, but we found that we can start telling the archaeologists we think this is a linear feature. That's our way of telling them, I think this might be a bayonet or a ramrod, and we've actually gotten to where we've been right several times. Which, by the way, that bayonet I was holding up for my granddaughter's baby book, it's interesting, we found that the second day we were out there, and we found it right next to two other bayonets that they had found on that Saturday. And I'm convinced that whoever was excavating those, because they're very careful about excavating the bayonets, you know, more like an archaeologist would. They don't use shovels. They use their trowels and do it right. I'm convinced that whoever excavated those two on that Saturday were sitting on the third. And that's why we were able to find that. So I want to thank whoever was sitting on that spot. But you can see what they look like after they've cleared them out. This is actual field work. One of my favorite artifacts, and you've seen it a couple of times, but I don't know if you've paid attention, you notice one of these was 18.5 centimeters. And if you look, is it here today? Did we bring it? Is it in there? They don't even know if they brought it. You can see that we found this the last day, so it's not conserved. But it seems to be a whole bayonet. And we did look up and find that there were pistol bayonets, but we can find nothing that had a socket. We can't find any socket pistol bayonets. Some of you reenactors may be able to educate us. But the socket, unfortunately, is missing, but it certainly looks like it had a connector. Now, the socket isn't there either, so it's like, where would the socket be if they broke it at the time? Throwing out a theory, and I'm not a professional archaeologist, so I can throw out anything I want to. My thought on this is that this bayonet broke so many times they finally couldn't use it for a bayonet anymore, but it still made a nice knife, so they carried it as a weapon. This was the large and the small of it. The next to the last day we were out there, the 4-day deal, it was the next to the last day, I think, or, well, it doesn't matter. But anyway, we found the biggest bayonet, the 54-centimeter bayonet, and within 2 feet of that one, we found the midget. So they were right next to each other. To me, this is fascinating thought about how in the heck did that happen. I'm not even going to throw out an idea there. Bayonet locations. I don't know if you can see it. Is the red the laser? Right in here are 5 bayonets. Over here are 2, the midget and the big one. Over here is another one, and I believe there was even one more out here in the easement. Is that it? That's the one? Okay. But anyway, that's 8 bayonets right there. That was, you know, you can imagine the discussions we had as Mexican Army historians and archaeologists and everything. How in the world would there be 8 bayonets, 5 of them in one group, thrown down on the ground in a line 1.5 miles south of the battlefield? And we did. We started talking about, is this a kill site? Is this a capture site? What the heck is going on here? Roger and Douglas got together and they came up with a theory which they're going to tell you more about. But I want to say that at the same time, and it wasn't me, I don't think I've seen Steve Morgan here. Is he here today? I don't believe he is. He's a dentist, and he's the first one that came to me and said, I know what this is. And he told me the exact same theory that these guys came up with independently. So it's interesting how people can get things figured out. Iron lock plate screw. I happen to have a Brown Bess musket, so I was able to just take a picture of mine, and you can see this is what we're talking about right here. There are two of them right there. This is the side plate, and the lock plate's on the other side. The cartridge boxes. This was another interesting thing that I think gives a lot of credence to the theory, and I doubt that Roger's going to spend much time on this because it's a minor point, but I think it's an important point. Whoops. You can see here they had these two buckles right here. I think that's them. I can't hardly see. But there's two buckles. Interestingly enough, the Georgia archaeologists told that we're down working on another project that's ongoing right now, told us that the British used iron buckles in there. And we're not finding iron buckles. What we're finding is brass cartridge box buckles. And you can tell that they're basically handmade, and they're very unique. They're not uniform, so these are not mass manufactured. So they're Mexican, and the thing, I'm going to show you in a second, but there's a couple of other buckles. We've got a belt buckle keeper. The brass ring down there, I think, is a scabbard ring, the one over here. We're not sure about this. It might be a pom-pom ring. And this certainly could have come off a sword scabbard. But these are all brass, once again, classic for Mexican Army. Another sling buckle, fairly classic we find a lot of those at our Mexican Army sites. This is an interesting slide, and once again, I hope you can see it. There's two different things identified here. There's buckles. The buckles are the blue. And then the red are the musket ball clusters. Now, I want to try to explain why we would make a slide with musket ball clusters versus the cartridge box buckles. We have good evidence in the documents that the Mexican armies carried paradas of musket balls. That would be a ration of cartridges. We are still unable, and please, if any of you have documentation of how many cartridges the Mexican Army considered a parada, a reload, I'm throwing out a number 8, 10, 13. We've seen different clusters of balls, but they would carry them in their cartridge box, probably with a string tied around them. Be very careful when you read De La Peña, because Carmen Perry translated that the Mexican army was overloaded with ammunition. De La Peña said they were overloaded and they had 8 rounds apiece. Well, that wouldn't have been 8 rounds, it would have been 8 paradas. I went back and looked up the original Spanish. He didn't write rounds, he wrote paradas. So they may have had 80 rounds apiece. That would make a lot more sense that he said they were overloaded with ammunition. But anyway, we're finding these clusters, and it seems to me like what we're finding is where they dropped paradas. And it's interesting also to me that if they're dropping their cartridge boxes, you should find 2 cartridge box buckles for every 2 or 3 paradas of musket balls. And we're not finding that. In fact, we found the buckles basically almost all in the same area, and the dropped musket ball clusters all along this linear formation. Any experts out there know what this is? Gun wrench. There we go. This is a picture that I found on eBay of an 18th century. They called it a common screwdriver, and they said that was very rare at that time to call it a screwdriver. There was something screwing device or something they called it, but they didn't call them screwdrivers. Anyway, it's also got a pick on this end. There's another gun tool that we found. That's got a hammer. I had a harder time finding a good picture of one like this, but there's a hammer, a screwdriver, and a pick. We had some sword hanger buckles. 2 of the 3 of these are Civil War, and one of them's from our site. And I put them on there to show you that things don't change very much. And also there was a big discussion, and I won't get into it, and to be honest with you, I don't know who was on which side, but there was a big discussion among the archaeologists about whether this was a fancy sword, because this was such a lightweight hanger buckle, or whether it was a common one. It generally seems to me like if the Civil War ones are this common dug that look the same basically as ours. By the way, this one's ours. This is the one from our site. And these 2 are both Civil War dug sword hanger buckles that I found on the internet once again. Spur. It's kind of interesting now that we're getting into some horse stuff. Manuel's going to show you some more artifacts, that there was cavalry at this site. We got a spur. This is the only other one of these that I've seen other than the Sea of Mud that we've excavated from a Mexican Army site, which was fascinating to me. We have a lot of these from the Sea of Mud. Of course, they got stuck in the Sea of Mud and they had 1,200 mules. And so these were probably mule shoes / horseshoes. And so I think we have decent evidence that at least one horse or animal made it this far across Boggy Bayou. Of course, there was a lot of documentation that most of them lost their horses trying to cross Boggy Bayou. But I think with a spur and a Mexican horseshoe and some other things we're going to show you, it looks suspicious that the cavalry made it that far. These are the horseshoes that we found in the Sea of Mud, and we found a lot of them. This is actually very, very classic with a Spanish style, the flat and the wide style. I've not heard of these being found in the Republic of Texas sites or the Texas sites. It's very old style Spanish. We found utensils. I'm not sure, after you hear the rest of the deal and the rest of our theory, why in the world these would be there, but they are. We're finding some handles. This is a two-pronged fork right there. Whoops, hit the wrong one. Two-pronged fork right here. You can kind of see the prongs right there. But we did find a few utensils there. And we found a real interesting artifact that, once again, we need help with. This is what it looked like the day we found it. And this is after conservation. And I found I spent a lot of time looking, and this is Civil War artifacts. This is a bit chain right here, and these are sword hangers. And they kind of looked like this, but once again, they certainly were not exactly the same. It's fascinating to me that, once again, and it's already been discussed, that lots of times we come up with more questions than we do answers. Here's another really good one. I've looked and looked. I looked for compasses. I looked for lockets. I've looked for several things, and I don't know. This is a brass ring. There's obviously some sort of little wire connector here, and we found 3 little pieces of very flat, old-looking glass in the very same hole. Now, we don't know for sure that they're associated, but they, to me, seem to be. We found at Madam Powell's, when the HAS excavated Madam Powell's, there was a lot of this very flat, which would have been clear glass at the time, but it doesn't weather all that well. So I'm still suspicious about that. I've come up with a list of 5 questions that I want Roger to help answer you. I tried to email this to Roger so he would be aware of this, but I never got it to him. So y'all can, hopefully his talk's going to answer these questions. If not, we'll have the question and answer period. Why the linearity? Why are we finding artifacts in a line? Why do we find so many musket balls, and why are they in clusters? I mean, we found more musket balls here than we did on the battlefield. Twice as many, Douglas tells me. Why so few cartridge box buckles compared to the number of balls? Why so many bayonets in a small area? It's been my impression that one of the big things that the Mexican Army had an advantage over the Texans is they had more bayonets. The bayonets were considered quite a useful weapon. In fact, I've always been told that the India pattern brown bess musket was so inaccurate they considered the bayonet the best part of it. And where are the Texans' artifacts? I think that's all I've got. Thank you.